Right. We're live. I'd like to welcome members, officers, and members of the public, if there are any watching, to this Licensing and Regulation Committee. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee member and scrutiny manager to explain how proceedings will work.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit in front of them. The microphone will light up green and the Chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the Chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and will be visible on the YouTube stream. Are there any questions from members before we start the meeting? No, thank you. Back to you then, Chair.
Thank you. Item number 1 is apologies for absence. I have received apologies from councillors Daniel Allen, Elizabeth Dennis, and David Barnard. Do we have any others?
Lisa Nash.
Thank you. Item number 2, minutes, 14th of October 2024 and 10th of March 2025. Unless there are any objections, I plan to approve both sets of minutes as one. Therefore, are there any objections to that? No. Therefore, I'd like to propose that we take as read and approve as a true record of the minutes of the meetings of the committee held on the 14th of October 2024 and 10th of March 2025. Can I have a seconder? Ian Albert, thank you very much. Any comments? No. Should we go to the vote?
Thank you, Chair. That motion's carried.
Thank you. Item number 3, Chair's announcements. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available on the council's YouTube channel, as well as on the council's ModGov site, alongside the documents from this meeting. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under the Chair's announcements on the agenda. For the purposes of clarification, in order to vote on an agenda item at this meeting, a member must be present for the entirety of the debate and the consideration of that item. If a member leaves the room at any point of the item, they will not be able to vote. Item number 4, notification of other business. There is no other business. Item number 5, public participation. There is no public participation at tonight's meeting. And then item number 6 is the Licensing Service Annual Report 2024-25. Steve Cobb to present.
Thank you. I find it hard to believe that it's a year since I was doing this last time. Doesn't time fly? And it's nice to see so many happy faces all dying to hear me speak again. I'll caveat my report as I always do at the beginning of it. I'm the person sitting here talking about all of the excellent work that the team do, but I only manage the team. I'm not the person that does the work. And it's really important that you understand that it's the licensing officers that keep this team going and that do all of the work that this report covers. And it's important to realise that this report doesn't cover every single thing that we do. We also have support from officers in the management support unit that do a lot of the basic administration for us. And by doing that, it allows my officers to concentrate on the more, I won't say important tasks, but the more professional tasks that you need a qualification to deal with. But it also allows our fees to be slightly lower to our customers because we can get so much work done by the excellent officers in MSU. So well done to all of my team. It's the only chance I get to say it in public, so I have to say it. In terms of my report, I don't propose to go through every single bit of it. Certainly the first part that tells you what we do. Those of you that were on the committee last year would have had the opportunity to hear me talk about that in more detail. The only bit that I'd like to highlight about what we do is that we, at long last, have a concert at Nebworth in 2026. Councillor Nash is not here, so she can't tell me how pleased she is that Nebworth have got a concert again. But if we've got any fans in the room, we've got Iron Maiden coming to Nebworth in July of next year. It will be a really big concert. It's out in the public domain. And they've chosen Nebworth to end their European tour. So it's a really, really good pat on the back for North Herts. If anybody's interested in what we do in terms of licensing in the build up to the event and wants to have a walk around and see what the sort of things that we check and have a look at the infrastructure in the event, let me know, and I can speak to the organisers and we can do a little walk around for members of this committee, the exec member, so that you can see what an event like that involves for my team. So moving rapidly through inspections, this committee in the past has given me some really useful feedback on inspections. Our inspections now are much higher than they have been previously. That said, if you compare this year's to last year's, it looks like we haven't been that busy. The reason is last year, in response to feedback from this committee, we hit all of our premises really hard and got our numbers up. So everybody had a risk-rated inspection. What's really important, we believe, is that we don't inspect just for the sake of inspecting. And so each of those premises that we inspected in the previous reporting year was risk-rated. And the majority of them were risk rated as an inspection in 2026. So that's why our numbers are down in this report, but they'll be back up again next time round because it's the risk rating cycle.
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
So, Chair, if I may, before we went on to, I had a question about Iron. Well, not specifically about Iron Maiden. More years ago, I cared to mention, but I was at the Robbie Williams concerts at Nebworth, and at the end, it was let's just say I had reservations about the safety of the thing, because as I recall, no car was allowed to leave the site until every pedestrian had left. I recall waiting, I think, 4.5 hours to get up the site, which seemed to me, it seemed to suggest that there was some I left with some reservations about whether that site is suitable for large numbers. If you've got no way to stream out pedestrians from the traffic, is that now? It's a long time ago. I assume, is that now been resolved, that issue?
Yes, it has. The most recent concert we had there was Liam Gallagher, when we had, I think it was 80,000 people there, and we didn't have the same problem. The traffic management company that was engaged by the organisers for that event had separate routes for pedestrians and cars, had a separate area for coaches and taxi drop-offs. So nobody was prevented from leaving the site, and they were funneled away so that there wasn't an interaction between cars and pedestrians. And it did work really well. So I'm hoping it will work well again this year. The promoter for the Iron Maiden concerts, one that we worked with before, they were the promoters for the Sonosphere event. So they've got good knowledge of Nebworth, and I'm really hoping that we don't have the issues that you mentioned, and I know did exist some years ago.
Thanks, Steve. Councillor Prendergast.
Thanks, Steve, and a big thank you to the hard work of all your officers. You've explained why some of the inspections have gone down. Does that also apply to HMOs, though? Because the number of HMO inspections has gone down considerably. And I'm just looking at part of the report, and where was I? 12.2627. Really pleased to hear there's more robust systems in place for assessing the applications. So I'd have expected to see them rise, the inspections. Is there a reason for that?
Later in the report. Yeah, in terms of HMO inspections, they're not risk rated in the same way as pubs or clubs. Before we grant an HMO license for the first time, or before we grant an HMO license on renewal, they have to have an inspection. They also get one midterm, and it's a 5-year license. So it depends on the cycle of when the licenses were issued. We haven't issued any, we have issued some new HMO licenses, but they've all been inspected. We have renewed some and they've been inspected, but the midterm ones, it depends on the cycle of when they were first licensed. So some years it's really low, some years it's ridiculously high, but it's just the way it works.
Thanks, that's really clear. So, and as I understand it from the report, it looks like we're getting somewhere in terms of identifying those HMOs that we may have been unaware of. Is that fair to say?
Yes, we've worked predominantly with our revenues and benefits team to look at properties where there are a number of surnames, which is normally a good indication of HMOs. We've certainly picked up some new HMOs, and the team are working on some others, and we've got a really good working relationship with our colleagues in environmental health now, so they might go out to deal with some housing condition issues that might prompt us to go out and look whether or not that's an HMO.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was inspections. In terms of applications, we are up on applications, but not significantly up. Again, I give you year on year figures, and whilst it doesn't look that we've necessarily gone up, it's not always a straightforward comparison, because, as I mentioned, HMOs to Councillor Prendergast, they're 5-year licenses, so there's going to be cycles for those. Taxi licenses, if it's a driver, they're 3-year licenses. If it's a vehicle, they're 1-year licenses. So the number of applications are not a constant. What's a more accurate indication of where we are in terms of workload is the number of licenses that we have current at any one time. And you'll see in Appendix B that we're almost 100 licenses up, which is really encouraging, because it means that new businesses are opening up in the district. We have lost some, sadly, but the number of new businesses that we get in far outweighs the number of businesses we've lost, which again is really positive for the district. Service requests, I've given you a table of figures there and explain what service requests are. Service requests have gone up considerably, particularly in terms of taxi complaints. That it says 76 taxi complaints on there. We've had a lot more than 76 taxi complaints, but they're 76 that were genuine complaints that we had to investigate. We get an awful lot of vexatious complaints along the lines of, I saw an Uber car parked in Hitchin, so it must be breaking the law, and we get a ridiculous amount of those. But I've tried to focus the facts that I give you on work that we've actually had to do. We had a meeting with the Taxi Trade Association last week. Councillor Debenham was there as the exec member. We did bring to the taxi trade's attention the impact it's having on our workload of the number of vexatious complaints that they are putting in. And to help focus their mind, we did cost out how much it cost us to process the complaints that we considered vexatious, and translated it into a cost on their license fees if they continued in that vein, and it resulted in very positive talks. And I think they grasped the point that we was making, and whilst we was keen to make make clear to them that we're not saying don't complain if you see something's wrong. We're saying don't complain vexatiously against one of your competitors just because you think it's going to give you an advantage or something along those lines. Got some puzzled looks. I sensed a question coming.
You're right. But not about that.
Okay, licensing fees, as read, the long-standing resolution that this committee made many years ago about setting fees is still relevant, and all the fees have been set in accordance with that, as you would expect. Licensing hearings, we only had 3 licensing hearings in the reporting year, and you think 3 licensing hearings, that's not very much. The 6 people that sat on them will say that it's a significant chunk of their life that they won't get back because they were very long and complicated hearings. Oh, good.
I've got a question from Councillor Ruth Brown.
Yes.
They certainly were. And I was at the second one, and some of my colleagues here were at the first one. I think they were 10 hours each, weren't they? Something like that. But I wanted to ask you about that, because obviously 2 of those 3 related to Bygrave and the license for events in that area. And I noticed in 8.5, 8.6 and 8.7, it talks about what happened. From my point of view, I arrived at the second one and spent an hour waiting to find out whether it was going to go ahead or not because of some issues. So I wondered if you could comment on that, because I think we had been led to believe that the second date was set so that the period for appeal had expired. But apparently it hadn't, because it wasn't from the date of the hearing, it was from the date of the decision notice. So can you comment on what went wrong and what we've learned from it and what we might do differently in the future? That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. It's almost like you read my mind, because I was going to talk about those hearings. Yes, it was unfortunate, the second one that you sat on. It's very rare that you get a review hearing and a variation hearing come in for the same premises at pretty much the same time. And so we tried to manage it in the best way that we could. So we had the review hearing first, because obviously if the review had taken away the license, there would have been no point holding the variation hearing. So that was the reason that they were reversed and that the review hearing went first. In terms of calculating when the second hearing could be held, yes, it was. We calculated the period for appeal from the date of the first hearing, not the date that the decision notice went out. So we was a day out, that's what led to the legal discussions that we had at the beginning of the second hearing that you was on. So we have amended our procedures. So if we're ever in that position again, and hopefully we won't be in that position again, but if we're ever in that position again, we will allow a greater time to make sure that the decision notice has gone out and been received before we call in the next hearing. Because I know it's very frustrating sitting waiting to know whether the hearing was going to go ahead or not. I found it very frustrating running around trying to work out if the hearing was going to go ahead or not. And so we don't want to be in that position again.
Thank you. Can I come back, Chair? So what happened was that we were then reissued with paperwork based on the existing license, not what had been agreed at the review hearing, which made it all very complicated, partly because we'd read the other documents. And so it probably meant that we didn't have sight of those until very soon before the hearing. And I know the legal officer, the lawyer, was quite keen to defer it. But it also, from reading what's written in this report, it seems that the result was that those two sessions of 10 hours that we all gave our time voluntarily to take part in, then became ineffective because the decision was made by the magistrate. So that seems very, it feels like the democratic process didn't work the way it should have done. Have you got any comment on that?
It's always a risk with any licensing subcommittee hearing that there's a right of appeal and it would go to a magistrate's court. There has to be a right of appeal. Councillors make the original decision. If it's appealed, it goes to court. That's any licensing regime works on that basis. I don't think it helped with the confusion over particularly the second hearing. I think that might have had an impact on the decision that was made, which is why the appeal was partly successful on a couple of issues. I would say that the majority of the subcommittee's decision was upheld. It was only some minor amendments that were made by the magistrates' court. The whole decision was appealed, but we were successful in defending the majority of the decision. There was just some issues with a small part of the decision in relation to the evidence that was referred up to in the decision notice that shouldn't have carried any weight. And I know there was some confusion with the late change of paperwork on the second hearing that may have led to the decision that was made.
So it's pleasing to hear that it wasn't significantly changed from what the licensing subcommittees agreed. My understanding, I mean, we worked really hard in that second session to come up with something that was a win-win, really, that was acceptable to both the applicant and the local residents. And my understanding at the end of that meeting was that the applicant was quite happy with what we'd reached. So it's really disappointing that some of it was then reversed. And obviously, I noticed in 8.6, it said the appeal centred on administrative errors during the hearing process, the wording of conditions, and, as you say, the way to partition to evidence. But it feels to me as though they would not have appealed the decision if there hadn't been those administrative errors. And I think you've kind of corroborated that from what you've said tonight. And so I just sincerely hope that we can put on record that we make sure that this situation doesn't occur again. Thank you.
Yeah, as with anything, when anything doesn't go the way that we think it should have gone, or even if it goes the way we think we expected it to go, there's always an opportunity for lessons learned. We're all seeking to be better. We're not gonna say we're perfect, and so if there's any opportunity to improve, we're always going to take it.
Thanks, Steve. Tim Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just echo as well our appreciation of the hard work of your officers, Steve. It's very, very much appreciated. Can I just clarify one point on what you've just discussed, and forgive me because there's a possibility that maybe I just haven't grasped it because I wasn't in the second one, but was an element of what didn't quite go right was that parts of the license, the second committee made changes to parts of the license, even though the applicant, and obviously I spent 10 hours with that applicant in front of them, wasn't actually trying to amend on that second one. Was that part of the procedural error, if you like? And that absolutely taken the point that none of us are perfect. So, but is that right?
Yes, the part of my report that refers to licensing conditions that needed tidying up. Partly it was the way that we worded them, and they weren't totally clear, so we just needed to tidy the wording up. But the biggest issue with the conditions was the variation only sought to make amendments to the license for events above 7,500 people, and unfortunately, and I'm guessing it's the advice that the committee were given, some conditions were put on events below 7,500 people that had was not up for discussion. And so it may well have been the advice that the subcommittee was given, but of course those conditions that were put on were unlawful, so we had to take those conditions off.
Can I just come back? So and yeah, okay, I understand now. And the advice being from the lawyer. So it was basically a mistake and one that we're learning from.
You can say that. I possibly couldn't, because I'm not going to criticise somebody, because the advice that the lawyer would have given would have been in private, and I wasn't subject to it. So it'd be wrong for me to criticise somebody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without having party to it. But it appears some wrong advice was given.
And I acknowledge that I wasn't in that second one as well. But yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks for clarifying it, Chair.
Go, Steve.
Where did I get to? So that's licensing, hearings, and yeah, at the risk of repeating myself, I hope we're never in that position again. The only good thing that's come out of that is the lessons learned exercise, so we're more prepared if it happens again. In terms of enforcement activity, it doesn't necessarily look like there's been a huge amount of activity if you look at our report, but a report doesn't always give a clear picture. The Cat Survival Trust, that took, I would say, I'm not even going to put a number on it, but weeks, if not months, of the licensing team leaders' time. I know I've already praised my team once, and I doubt that they're looking, but I will put on record my thanks to her and her commitment over the Cat Survival Trust. She worked evenings, she worked weekends, she went over and above what you would expect an officer to do to make sure that those cats were not euthanized when they were healthy cats. She was supported by the wife of the license holder, who put up the money to pay for Hertfordshire Zoo to come in and look after the cats and to rehome all bar 3 cats that sadly had to be euthanized for health reasons. But that could have been so much worse. We were faced with a situation where we genuinely believed we were going to be asked to euthanize at the council's cost 24 or 25 critically endangered cats. And I think the outcome that we got on that was way beyond what anybody expected. It's a very sad case. Dr. Moore, who was convicted of animal welfare, had dedicated his life to looking after cats. Sadly, as he got older, he found it more and more difficult, which resulted in the standards going down on the site. And then right at the end, during the conviction and after the conviction, and when we was working with him to try and resolve the situation, I don't know if you all saw it in the local paper, but he sadly got attacked by one of his cats and he lost his foot. So it's a very, very sad end to his career, where he saved hundreds, if not thousands, of critically endangered cats. But that said, when the standards are not up to scratch and animals are suffering, we have to step in and we have to do something. Policy.
While we're there, Ruth Brown.
Hello. So that's the only significant enforcement case during the reporting period. So I think I read the reporting period was to the end of September. Was that this year or last year? It's 24-25, isn't it? I'm just wondering if you could comment about the shop in Royston. Were you involved in that one?
I'm happy to comment on it. Yeah, it's the 1st of October last year until the 30th of September this year. The Royston vape shop. Hopefully, you've all seen that this council closed the Royston vape shop, which remains closed at the moment. The reason it's not in this report is because it didn't sell any licensable products, and so it didn't have a license from us. It was tobacco, so it was the responsibility of Trading Standards at County. But if I switch hats for a minute, as you'll see at the beginning of the report, I don't just manage the licensing service, I also manage the community safety service, and it was my community safety service that closed the shop.
Oh, right. Okay.
But thank you for mentioning it, because
That's really helpful, because on the shop it's got Hertfordshire Trading Standards and NHDC, so it's just helpful to know what our part was.
Cheers. Thanks, Chair. And my apologies immediately, because I'm about 3 sections behind here, because I was waiting for Steve to finish his report, and obviously now we've launched into questions during the report. So I've got 2 other questions where you haven't got to yet, so I'll come to those later. Let me deal with the two you have done. On HMOs. I mean, I know, as I think I said this time last year, is we don't know what we don't know. It still feels a low number for the district that we've got potential licenses for. Are we looking to do any kind of working with our comms team to do any sort of social media and other things around this, or in the magazines, websites, and so on, around HMOs, and reminding people that they need, if they've got one, it needs to be licensed, and equally, obviously, for that matter, if people think they are living near where someone's HMO, to actually report it into the council, because we can always say, well, we already know about it. And so just really on the comms stuff, and it would ill befit, especially now we have a chair of the committee from Bearton Ward, for me not to mention scrap metal. So on that, and thanks for the work and just generally thanks for the work of all the team, obviously, Steve. Good to see the inspections. Is there anything, and recognising that the Environment Agency are in the lead on these things, is there anything specific that you'd want to add? Conscious, obviously, there might be some things that we can't say in a public session, but specifically you want to add in the public session is in relation to the inspections that have been done on the scrap metal, where we've got scrap metal licenses in issue at the moment, both in Hitchin and obviously elsewhere in the district.
Thank you. In terms of HMOs, yes, we are going to do a comms campaign. We haven't done it yet, purely because pressure of workload. We didn't want to risk saying, tell us about your unlicensed HMOs, and not be in a position to deal with them, but we are in a position to deal with them now. In terms of scrap metal, we are very limited to what we can inspect in terms. I know you've probably heard me say this so many times, but if anybody's watching that doesn't know this, all we can do as a district council is look into the finance of how the site is run, to make sure that they're not dealing in cash, to make sure that it's all legitimate and above board. But what we do, because we've worked with our colleagues in fire and ward councillors, and we know why the fires are likely to have started, when we go in and do an inspection, we do look at the individual metal containers to make sure that they're not stacked above the bunding walls, to make sure that the metal's not falling over the back onto the footpath by the river. We do ask to see their CCTV. They have got CCTV that recognises heat detection. We do check that it's working. And whilst we are not the lead agency for doing that, we just feel it's inappropriate to go in and not check it, given that the problems that have been had at the site.
I'll just take one more from Tim Johnson, and I think what we'll do is save. I think Councillor Albert made a good point. I've set a bit of a dodgy precedent. So what we'll I'll take yours, Tim, and then if we could, if that's all right with everyone, we'll save questions to the end, because I don't want to keep interrupting your flow.
Okay.
That,
for want of a better phrase. Tim.
thanks, Chair. And sorry, Steve, because it's jumping around again. The vape shop closure was really good and absolutely deserved from what I'd heard. And I don't want to put you on the spot at all about it, but I imagine you're aware, but diagonally opposite, further up the high street, there's an even more garish vape shop open since. And I genuinely haven't got any idea what reassurances can be given that they haven't just transferred up the high street and changed the name. Can we satisfy ourselves at all as a council that is a different entity and not the same people trading under a different name? I really don't know the answer to that.
We can certainly look into that if it's a premises that's been rented, say for example, from a property company or an estate agent, like the premises that we closed. We can go to them, and that's how before closing the Royston vape shop, that's how we found out who was actually paying the rent for it and made sure we targeted the right people. So we can do that, and we'll work in conjunction with our colleagues in trading standards as well. And I'm not hiding behind this, but going through Parliament at the moment, there is the tobacco and vapes bill that significantly introduces extra enforcement powers. Fortunately, not for this council, or not for this council at the moment in the current council makeup, but it's a county function, and it is beefing up the powers available to trading standards officers.
Sorry, just really quickly on that. If you'd like to speak offline, because it's the old Johnson's dry cleaning premises. I don't know who the landlords are, but we can perhaps speak offline about that if you like. I've just got my suspicions.
Okay,
it's not been made obvious.
We'll certainly look into it, because the last thing we want is to close one premises and it opens again, particularly a few doors away. Okay, so in terms of policy work, there's a list of all the policies that have been adopted through this committee in the last reporting year. I should say that at a previous meeting, when I brought the sex establishment policy and the taxi and private hire licensing policy here, you made a number of very helpful suggestions, and you delegated the authority to me to make those changes in conjunction with the chair. I just want to put on record that all of those changes were made, and they were signed off by the then chair, Councillor Willoughby. So again, same tonight. If you give me some really good ideas, I will put them into practice. The only policy that you're considering tonight is the Licensing Act policy, which we'll come on into in due course. Channel shift, we are continuing to work with our digital team to try and make the customer journey easier. It's about striking a balance. There's a cost to everything that we do, and we need to balance out the cost of any digital changes that we make, balancing it against, are we actually going to be using that software in the future? So is it a sensible investment given the limited resources available to the council? But there are things that we can do internally. We are working with the Customer Services Centre to try and integrate the new customer portal with our licensing database to make the customer journey easier, and indeed make the job easier for my officers. Because at the moment, if something comes in electronically in PDF format or by other format, somebody has to sit and copy type it into the licensing database. I'm reliably reassured that if the integration goes well with the CRM, that will auto-populate all of the fields and significantly make that journey for the customer easier and hopefully cheaper. And I don't like to say anything's cheaper, because you don't know what's around the corner. In terms of projects, Women and Girls Safety Charter, I think I've attended about 4 committees prior to this saying Women and Girls Safety Charter is coming. And you probably got really sick of me saying the Women and Girls Safety Charter is coming. It actually started when Councillor Prendergast was exec member, if I remember rightly, and so probably you more than most have thought, when is this actually going to appear? It is now live. It is up and running in Letchworth and Hitchin. Got officers at the moment working in with Baldock, and then they're going to be working with Royston to get those signed up as well. If you didn't see it in the press, the Police and Crime Commissioner came down with Councillor Allen as leader of the council and handed out the certificates to everybody that is currently signed up and trained. We have commissioned a new video. We had the original video that many of you starred in, that's got the scenarios that are used for training, but we felt like that was a little bit lengthy, and the feedback that we was getting from our customers, not licensed premises, but our customers, is it was too long and they lost interest partway through. So we managed to get some more funding from the PCC, and we've put together a much smaller video with Joe as our service director being the main star of this video. It's much more user friendly. It's available on our website, as is the training video. As part of our inspections, we do check that the premises that have signed up do know what they're doing, because obviously there's no point signing anybody up to a charter if they're not actually going to do it. And our colleagues in the police are doing it as well. Recently, the police did some unannounced licensing inspections with some plainclothes officers, where they went into pubs predominantly asking for Angela, and you'll be pleased to know that the vast majority of pubs not only knew what Ask for Angela was, but they did everything properly. They took the person immediately to a back room or somewhere away from the public. They organised them a taxi or offered to phone somebody up, and it's a really, really positive message. So we'll be doing some more positive publicity on that in the not too distant future. Something a lot of me equally proud of that the team have done is, as you all know from all the policies I bring to you, I'm always adding safeguarding into policies, and there were some suggestions last time round that we shift the order of our policies to prioritise safeguarding even more, which I did. Our apprentice, her apprenticeship came to an end this month, and we've been fortunately we've been able to retain her as a licensing officer. She identified a problem with, not necessarily a problem. She identified that our safeguarding procedures could be better with taxi drivers. Because of COVID, we had to change the way that we did things, and it resulted in taxi drivers being sent a presentation that they had to read, and then they had to complete a test and send it in. Well, our apprentice done an analysis of that, and then did an analysis of verbal knowledge tests that applicants also have to do. And the amount of drivers that were failing on safeguarding was a ridiculously high number. You would think after somebody done the training package that they would then be able to answer safeguarding questions in verbal tests, but they wasn't. And so she has written a brand new safeguarding package. It is now delivered face-to-face for all new applicants. So nobody can get a taxi license now unless they attend a face-to-face safeguarding session with a test at the end of it, which they have to pass. It's taken a little bit of time to roll it out because we've got a lot of applicants at the moment, but once that's finalised, and we think very early in the new year, all drivers that are renewing will also have to come in for a face-to-face safeguarding session. The package will constantly be changing because, as I'm sure you're aware, safeguarding is moving very, very rapidly. And since she's introduced this new safeguarding, we have seen an 80% increase in drivers that are able to better understand safeguarding and pass the verbal test. So all credit to her for doing that, and I think that shows the value of the apprenticeship scheme that this council supports. Nearly finished, Price. Taxi and private hire, another long running project, but again, really boosting our environmental credentials. Hopefully, you're all aware that there is a license plate on the back of all taxis. Previously, they were plastic and had to be changed every time a taxi renewed, whether it be 12 months or 6 months, resulting in piles and piles and piles of plastic plates. Not environmentally friendly. We've sourced a new supplier, and we now give a vehicle a plate made out of recycled material, and that plate lasts the lifetime of the vehicle. It just has a tamper-proof disc that's put on it with the expiry date. And so that will make a massive difference to the amount of plastic that was previously being used in taxi licensing. There is quite a lot more in the report, but I have spoken for long enough, and I know there are some more questions coming, so I'm happy to leave it there, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, Brill. Thanks very much, Steve. And I know a few people have said it, but yeah, massive thank you to you and the team for all the work. Amazing. Yeah, so first of all, Amy Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Steve, it's very recent, the changes regarding us needing to, or a licensing committee having to put physical posters out in an area where there's an event going to be taking place. Obviously that came out after you'd produced this. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that, given our digital exclusion policy and such.
Yes, that's a really interesting point. When we come on to talk about the Licensing Act policy, I'll go into more detail about a consultation paper that came out really, really annoyingly 6 days after I published all of this paperwork. But on the specific point that Councillor Allen raises, one of the things that is recommended in the consultation is that for Licensing Act applications where applicants currently have to put an advert in, the terminology is in a newspaper that circulates in the area. In reality, we've only got the Comet and the Royston Crow. We also have to we already display applications on our website. The applicants already have to put posters up on their premises. The suggestion from a committee of the Great and Good that looked at the Licensing Act have said that they believe that the newspaper ads are just unnecessary burdens on businesses because they cost £400–500 a time. The counter argument to that is if somebody's not walking past the premises and doesn't see the blue notice up in the window or on the door, or they don't have access to our website, or they don't have online access in general, do they rely on the Comet and the Royston Crow to see these licensing applications to make representations if they think it's going to have an impact on them? It's a really, really difficult one because I'm not really aware of anywhere that gets the Royston Crow or the Comet delivered, but I know it's available in newsagents and you can go in and pick it up. This is a consultation at the moment, and I think what I'm going to do is, when people make representations, try and establish where they've seen the application to try and get an understanding of who uses newspapers, who uses online, and of course we have introduced about a year, 18 months ago now, ward members getting notified of applications in their ward, and of course we don't know if ward members are circulating that information to people that they believe need to know it, and our representations coming from that way. So that was a really long-winded way of saying I haven't got an answer to your question. but I'm aware of the various arguments that we need to consider when we look at it.
Thank you. Yeah, Tim.
Thanks, Chair. Steve, I mean, it's a shame to get rid of what I would term some traditions, but I think, putting it in newspapers is antiquated, isn't it? I mean, this day and age, I mean, certainly in Royston, people are getting their news from Royston Reporting Online Facebook page. And I think it's absolutely, yeah, I'm not a particular fan, but anyway.
Not very real.
But I think it's fair enough to not ask businesses to stump up 500 quid to stick it in the paper, and we should move on online, basically. That's my view anyway.
Sorry, can I just respond to that? What we are going to have to do as a council, because it's a consultation that's out, is we can respond as individuals. Anybody can respond to the consultation, but what I thought that I would do is do a summary of it and send it round outside of this meeting to all members of the committee, so that we can perhaps try and get a consensus to do a response on behalf of North Herts Licensing Committee. If we can't, as councillors, you can all do your individual responses. I don't know if you feel that would be useful to try and get a consensus on behalf of the committee.
Yeah, I'm semi-retired, so if you give me 500 quid, I'll do smoke signals from the Heath if you like.
But I know I don't have to answer that. I'll just say I don't think smoke signals really fit into our environmental credentials. Sorry, I had to say that.
Just responding to that. Not responding to the smoke signals, but responding to what's just been raised. I tend to concur with Tim that that newsprint is not read by most people, but I was going to say I welcome the fact that ward members now get notified. We are all essentially volunteers and busy people, though, so to expect us to inform all the people that might be interested is difficult. And I know that for planning applications, they have a guidance rule. I think there is a regulation, but there's also guidance around how many people and how close you have to be to the application, and you receive a letter. So obviously there's a cost to that, but that would be a much more effective way of making sure you reach the people that may be most affected. Just a thought. I like the idea of finding out where people have heard that respond. That's will give you a good indication. But we obviously need to change the way we communicate. I wouldn't advocate an official Facebook page like North Herts, fine, but I wouldn't advocate some of the local pages because there's a lot of misinformation that gets spread around. Anyway, that was just my comment on that. I was going to just ask you. It's fantastic to hear that the Women and Girls Safety Charter is now active and live, and I remember Sean talking about it when he was a cabinet member. Just wondered if you'd got any timescales for Royston, because it feels like we're at the bottom. We're going to be last. Have you got any idea when it might come in Royston?
I don't have a date now, but if you're happy, I will speak to the team and I'll email you separately.
Thanks, Steve. Ian Albert.
Just thanks, Chair. And yeah, and again, really just to echo sort of Ruth and maybe Sean's points around, I think that the importance of that work we're doing on the charter, and obviously thank the team for that. It's really welcome, and it's really welcome to hear the progress that's been made on it. A couple of things. The report mentions, and just I've been just interested to understand. The report mentions, I think in 2.6, about the role of the green space team, and just to sort of understand the interaction between sort of your team and the green space team in terms of events and where maybe sometimes events where council land's concerned. And then I think the second thing is, I think the importance of the point that you made about the sort of online forms, and obviously it saves time for us as a council. Hopefully it saves time for the applicants, probably more importantly. But But I guess in doing that, and hopefully we can press it. I appreciate resources are tight. Everyone's really, really, really busy. One of the, I think the constant things I think I probably sort of hear around the place is the whether to what extent some of the form completion is relatively onerous. Now, there's lots of good reasons why the forms are relatively onerous, and if you're organising an event for 80,000 people, they really, well, I was going to use a different word. Let me say, they all really ought to be onerous and appropriate for doing that. But I guess obviously where we're looking at smaller events, or indeed just the sort of the 10 type events, the temporary event, it still sometimes feels that those forms are quite complex and maybe more than is necessary. Is it possible to kind of review the forms more generally? And I know, again, I'm conscious this is a workload and timing issue. To review the forms, particularly if we are thinking of looking at how we might do some of this stuff online, to make it, I think, as easy as possible for organizations to make applications for events and things, which I think is one of the great things in North Herts, the real lifeblood of the community, seeing fantastic events going on in our towns and villages, and we want to encourage that. But I know when I hear sometimes people, just when they see the form they have to fill it, they sigh as a it's kind of, and so I just was wondering whether that was something that we could look at, particularly in terms of if we are trying to do more stuff online, whether we can make things like that sort of simpler and less processy particularly for smaller organisations.
Yeah, really, really good points. In terms of our colleagues in green space who give out land licenses, we do work closely with them, and whilst the land license gives permission to use our land, it doesn't circumvent the need to get other permissions. So if, for example, some licensable activities were going to take place on our land and a premises license hadn't been obtained, or even worse, had been refused, we would let our colleagues in green space know so that they could either revoke or currently revoke their license. And very similar with Safety Advisory Group. If Safety Advisory Group are not happy with an event, whilst they can't stop it because they have no legal duty to stop it. Obviously, we don't want events going ahead on our land if we believe that there's a risk to the public. So we are currently working our job easier so that we don't have situations where our land is being used for something where we're not happy. In terms of the point on forms, totally agree that many of the Licensing Act 2003 forms are overly complicated and very difficult to understand. Sadly, they're prescribed forms, and so we can't change those. Most of the licensing that we do, local licensing, so taxes, street trading, the like, we design our own forms and we try to make them as easy to use as possible. Sadly, we can't change the Licensing Act forms, but what we try and do, particularly for community events, you'd have all seen from the report the number of temporary event notices we get a year. I think it averages about 600. I'm not going to name and shame any councils in particular. I'll just say other councils. But what the Act itself says is that you put in a temporary event notice, and if it's wrong, it just gets sent back as refused. Have another go. Lots of councils do that. We find that really frustrating. We're not doing anything unlawful, but for community events, if they put a form in and there's something missing or they've made a mistake or whatever, we don't reject it. We go back to them. We give them some advice. They adapt it. It comes back in again and it goes through. So we're trying to make the customer journey easier. Yes, changing the form would be the best way to do it, but unfortunately we can't do that. So we're just trying to work with community organisers to try and make their life a little bit easier, because invariably they're people that are not used to applying for licenses. They're volunteered because somebody else wouldn't, and we don't want them to stop doing events just because administration is ridiculous.
Thanks, Steve. Right, that is it for questions. I think they're off the hook on that part. Anyway, so the recommendations are that the committee 2.1 review the annual report and comment on its contents, and 2.2 note the annual report. Can I have a proposer, please? Ian Albert to propose, and a seconder. Amy Allen.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Is there any debate? Anyone else got anything left to say? No, nothing showing up on there. So should we go to the vote?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Great, thank you. So item number 7 is the adoption of a statement of licensing policy required by virtue of Section 5 of the Licensing Act 2003. Steve Cobb to present.
Thank you. I was hoping this was going to be a really easy report to give to you, and it would just open up to debate. But as mentioned earlier, after we'd done our consultation and we'd written reports and we'd got consultation feedback and had put everything together for you, last week government issued a consultation on major changes to the Licensing Act. So we're hopefully going to be adopting a policy, or full council's going to be adopting a policy that you as the licensing committee recommend to them, because in statute we have to do it by, I think it's the 7th of January. But it is then going to come back to you again to revisit that, because it looks like there are going to be a number of changes to the Licensing Act. Although that's said, and I'll run through them shortly, but the majority of them we are doing already as a council. Well, I'd say majority, that's a little bit unfair. Probably half of them we're doing already as a council. So I don't think it's going to be a massively onerous task to us. But in terms of the policy that's before you at the moment, not proposing any significant changes, because I think our policy works really well. It is a lengthy policy. I'm sure when you sit on a subcommittee and you see all of the sections that get reproduced in your report for you, it's a little bit daunting. But I think if you haven't got a robust policy that tries to address every single scenario, then it's going to be very difficult to make consistent decisions as a licensing subcommittee. And by grave aside, I'm still not classing that as an appeal that we've lost, because we didn't technically lose. We settled out of court. This council have never lost a licensing appeal, and that's down to the good decision making of the subcommittees, which I think a significant part of that is the training that you undertake and the fact that we've got a policy that does deal with these issues. So this policy is important, and it works really well. The main headlines: we've we've bolstered our vision for licensing. The vision for licensing is what sits at the top of the policy, and it says what North Herts Council sees as its vision for licensing. It has always said that we're looking to promote a vibrant daytime and nighttime economy, but that's it. This time the wording has been enhanced, as you'll see from the paragraphs in red in that section of the policy, that we are linking it to the council's ambitions in terms of economic development, vitality, community well-being, and the fact that while some people don't like a vibrant nighttime economy, if they live next to a pub and it's noisy for them, everybody works really hard. And I think that if we don't have an economy, a vibrant economy in North Herts for people to use in their leisure time, they're going to go elsewhere. We already know anecdotally people go elsewhere. So let's try and keep our customers in North Herts. Let's try and get some people visiting North Herts, and let's try and get increased spend in North Herts and make North Herts the place that people go rather than people leaving North Herts to go elsewhere. The rest of the changes are just tidying up really in light of the Bygrave application that we talked about earlier, where a variation application made some amendments to a part of a license that wasn't up for consideration. I've just clarified in the policy that so it doesn't happen again. I've clarified our position on noise nuisance, and in particular the position of environmental health officers in terms of noise nuisance. I know from experience that subcommittees have sometimes found it really frustrating that an environmental health officer turns up to a subcommittee and says, I believe there is a noise nuisance. And the subcommittee says, have you got some readings? And you normally get, I'm a professional environmental health officer, I'm telling you it's a noise nuisance. There are going to be times when there are readings, but we have to remember these are professional officers. In terms of statutory nuisance in law, for an environmental health officer to serve an abatement notice and turn up in court and defend that abatement notice, they don't need noise readings. They will be asked by the court, in your professional opinion, do you believe that is a nuisance? And obviously they will say yes or no. So I'm not saying that every time an environmental health officer appears before you that you have to take their word as gospel. All I'm saying in the policy is just clarifying that noise nuisance as an area of expertise doesn't always rely on readings. Readings are helpful, and there will be many occasions when readings are taken. We have the noise app, and I know the officers encourage people that are complaining about noise to use the noise app. But I'm just clarifying in our policy that we need to give some weight, and it's the subcommittee's decision how much weight to give, of the view of a professional officer that's trained in noise nuisance. Just tidying up our conditions on CCTV. I'm sure the police won't mind me name checking them, but the police seem to have an absolute obsession that every time somebody wants a license, you have to have CCTV, otherwise you can't have one. That's not true. As you know, as licensing committee members, you only impose a condition if it's absolutely necessary. If somebody wants to sell alcohol online and they store all the alcohol in their garage, and there is no public access to that garage, all they do is they look at the internet and say, oh, somebody wants a box of wine. They go and get a box of wine and they put it in the post. You don't need CCTV in that garage. And our policy is now saying that because there have been instances where those type of applications have been in the position where they've had CCTV almost forced upon them, and there's nothing in our policy that gives them the opportunity to say, actually, no, that's not appropriate. So there is now. We mentioned the Women and Girls Safety Charter. We highlight drink spiking because that's an important part of the safety charter. We just mentioned that sometimes there's conflicts with planning, and whilst we can't refuse a license application on the basis of absence of planning, in the same way as you can't refuse planning in absence of a license, our policy now confirms that if we were to grant a license that conflicted with planning permission because there was no legitimate licensing grounds to refuse it, we would put an informative on that license to remind them that they had to comply with planning, and we would put what the planning permission is. The topic that we seem to talk about on an annual basis, virtual licensing hearings. Our policy confirms that we will still have as a default position virtual licensing hearings, but as the 6 of you that sat on Bygrave know, when it's a particularly complex hearing or where there's going to be a number of members of the public there, we are able to have those face to face. And whilst the Bygrave hearings didn't come up with an ideal outcome, I think they would have been more difficult if we'd have been trying to manage those online. In terms of consultation responses, sadly, we didn't get that many. In Appendix something. In Appendix A, I've listed the main thrust of the consultation responses with officer comments. For transparency, I've given you the full consultation responses in Appendix B, and Appendix C is the proposed policy. There's no real changes coming out of the consultation responses. Bygrave Parish Council made a very helpful representation during the consultation process. And as you'll see from the paperwork, they did suggest that our policy should cover off more of the situation about what happens if there's an appeal, given that we've had an appeal recently and they felt that they was excluded from the appeal, and they felt it would have been more useful for them to have an informative telling them what they can and can't do and how they can be involved. I don't believe that's a matter for policy, but we are taking that on board. And as the report says, we will be putting together an information pack so that next time any of our decisions go to appeal, any of the other persons that are party to the hearing will be sent a pack so that they understand exactly where they stand lawfully. That is the policy as we are proposing it as officers to you. It's within your remit to make any changes to that policy that you feel appropriate, and for you to make a recommendation to full council, because as with it being a statutory policy, only full council can adopt this policy. But historically, they've always done it on the recommendation of the licensing committee, because you are the specialist people in licensing. I think that's all, Chair. I won't go into the government proposed changes at the moment, but if somebody wants to know what they are, I will talk about them separately.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, thank you for the work that's gone into that. Thank you for any members who contributed, and also to the members of the public who responded. Much appreciated. Tim Johnson.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, it's great. That's really in depth and very valuable. Thanks. The only alarm bell I've got really is, and it's not about the integrity of the environmental health officer as a professional person, but to sort of have in the policy something that says, well, it is a noise nuisance because I say so, as opposed to, and I know this could be fraught with danger about the readings aspect, but without actually stating some sort of criteria. I imagine, you put 2 or 3 environmental health officers on one case, it wouldn't be that subjective. They'd probably have a similar mind, I imagine, but it's open to subjectivity, isn't it? And it just, in a policy, it's a bit woolly, isn't it? Really, could we not just sort of tighten that up a little bit somehow?
I'm just looking to see what wording I've put in. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Apologies for talking slowly, but I'm trying to talk and look up a paragraph at the same time. And as all good males, we can't multitask.
Chair, I've got a point on the same thing. Well, maybe Steve is.
Please, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I was. That was the reason I press the light. I take your point, what you're saying, Steve, but and the example you gave was in a court of law or whatever. But in a court of law, I actually suspect that the 2 sides might actually bring their own experts, both bring their own experts in, and one might say one thing and one might say another thing in reality. And I think even there, you would, even if there was only one expert there, you would still test that out. And for me, the word substantial is the one I'm struggling with, which is in paragraph D1110 on page 84 of the pack. I might say we expect appropriate weight to be given, maybe rather than substantial. But I would absolutely, if I was on a panel, would want to test out what the officer is saying to us to understand the issue, what remedies have happened, why he or she is saying that. I don't think I would just take it for gospel, even though they are way more expert than I am in terms of noise and speakers and decibels and goodness knows what. But I still would want to test that out thoroughly, and that's why I struggled with the word substantial in there. I would give weight, expect weight to be given to those in appropriate weight. Maybe substantial for me takes it one step too far.
Thank you. That's a helpful point. What I was trying to get across was not that you can't question an environmental health officer, because you can question them the same as anybody else. If you think about the guidance that says the police are experts on crime and disorder, it doesn't say that you can't cross-examine them and that you can't challenge them. I was trying to strike a balance between the situation where a subcommittee may say you've got no evidence other than your professional opinion, so we're going to apply no weight to it. But then equally, listening to your explanation there, it has dawned on me that using the word substantial is probably better in the discretion of the committee. So I wouldn't be adverse, Chair, if it's the subcommittee's wish to change substantial to appropriate.
Yeah,
Yeah, Ruth had a light on first.
seems a bit unfair because I was going to concur with the points made by Councillor Albert and Councillor Johnson. And actually propose we take out the final sentence completely of D1110. Because the rest of it says that we're giving careful consideration to I think it says what Steve has intended. And I do have the same issue. I share that concern with my colleagues.
Oh, Sean, were you? Yeah, I thought that might have happened. Yeah.
It's always better. So I think what Steve's trying to say in that first paragraph says it is exactly the same as the last sentence, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got the amendment to take out from ordinarily the last sentence. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. Yeah.
We don't have a motion.
Right, so no, okay.
So you would need, whoever says that.
Would need to increase that. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Are there any further questions on the report? No. Okay. So the recommendations are that the committee consider the responses to the public consultation and support the proposed statement of licensing policy attached as Appendix C, subject to any amendment that may be about to come up. So can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Amy Allen.
Happy to propose.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Happy
Yep.
second, Chair.
Yeah, but second. And debate.
I was going to propose the amendment now. Is that the right time to do it? Yeah. I propose that we amend D1110 to take out the final sentence.
Sorry. Yeah. Sean to. Okay. So is there any debate on the substantive thing?
We can check over of the original motion if they're willing to accept that into their.
Who was, yes. And you are happy to accept that?
Yes.
Yeah. And as seconder, you're happy to accept it?
Yeah.
Okay. Right then, so
Now,
now we're at the debate on the substantive item. And it doesn't look like there is any debate. So I think we can go to a vote on the substantive item.
thank you, Chair. That motion's carried.
Thank you. And I think that brings the meeting to a close. So thank you very much for coming, everybody. Thanks, Steve. And yeah, have a good evening. Yeah. Yeah. And then it probably, yeah.